London, 1818. The night glittered like a crown of fire over the city, its spires piercing the fog, its carriages clattering through the narrow veins of Mayfair. Inside the Duke of Ashcombe's townhouse, the grand ballroom was alive with music, laughter, and the shimmer of candlelight refracted through cut crystal. Beneath chandeliers heavy with wax and rumor, Lady Eleanor Ashcombe stood perfectly still, her back straight, her chin high, her gown a soft bloom of baby-pink silk that caught the light like morning over frost. She had been told since childhood that stillness was grace, that silence was strength. And tonight, as every gaze in the room grazed her, she clung to that lesson like prayer. Across the marble floor stood her husband, the Marquis of Wrentham, a man carved from marble himself, or so the tun whispered. Tall, severe, his dark hair touched by silver at the temples, his expression perpetually unreadable. He spoke with measured politeness to a viscountess, his gloved hand resting lightly upon a cane though he scarcely needed it. The two had been married 6 months, and yet in that span, Eleanor had counted fewer words from him than candles now burning in the hall. She had believed once, perhaps foolishly, that affection might be coaxed by patience, that kindness might be returned if given enough time. But time had proven colder than any vow. That very evening she had heard it. His voice, low and sure, carried through the gilded air like a sentence. "I will never love her," he had said, speaking to an acquaintance half hidden by the columned archway. The words had been spoken without cruelty, and perhaps that was what wounded most, the calm certainty of them, as though affection itself were an imprudence. Eleanor had not flinched. She had not turned. She had remained at the edge of the room, fingers curled lightly around her fan, her composure untouched. Only the faintest tremor had passed through her breath, invisible to all but herself. Around her, the orchestra swelled, and dancers turned in elegant patterns as if the world itself had chosen to ignore the quiet collapse of her heart. The narrator of that glittering world, society itself, was merciless. Already she could feel its eyes tracing the outline of her disappointment. The young marchioness who tried too hard. The poor beauty with the unfortunate husband. It was said with smiles, of course, as everything cruel was. Yet she carried herself with the serene dignity of a queen before her court, bowing to guests, answering inquiries about her gown, her family, her health, as though her heart had not just been declared unloved. When Wrentham crossed the ballroom toward her, every step seemed deliberate, his composure unbroken. He greeted her with the faintest nod, not the intimacy of a husband, but the courtesy of a distant cousin. "My lady," he murmured, his tone smooth as glass. "You appear fatigued." "I am merely warm, my lord," she replied softly, her voice low enough that no one else could hear. "It is a crowded night." "Indeed," he said, glancing briefly at her face. His eyes lingered for only a moment, gray, cool, impenetrable, before shifting away again. "If you wish to retire early, I will make your excuses to her grace." "I would not wish to leave before the waltz," she said, allowing herself a small, practiced smile. "It would invite speculation." "Then we must spare ourselves that." His words were polite, but detached, as though her presence or absence made no difference to him. When the orchestra struck the first notes of the dance, she waited, as every wife might, for her husband's hand. It did not come. Instead, he turned to the same viscountess and bowed with impeccable civility. The room shifted almost imperceptibly, a ripple of murmurs and sidelong glances. The humiliation was not public enough to provoke outrage, only soft enough to pierce. Eleanor's fan stilled in her hand. The air between them remained empty, vast as the ballroom itself. Still she did not flee. She walked to the edge of the terrace where candlelight met the cool wash of night. The moon hung pale above the city roofs, and the hum of music drifted out behind her. She had learned long ago that tears, once shed, only fed gossip. So she stood there, calm, her reflection caught faintly in the glass of the French doors, a woman shaped by expectation, her beauty like armor, her gentleness mistaken for fragility. From behind her, voices carried faintly. A lady whispered, "It is a pity, such a sweet creature. One wonders if he even notices." Another replied, "Wrentham never notices anything that cannot advance his fortune." Their laughter tinkled like crystal breaking. Eleanor exhaled slowly, pressing her palm against the cold marble balustrade until its chill steadied her pulse. When she turned to re-enter the hall, something small fluttered to the floor before her. A folded slip of paper, white against the dark marble. She hesitated, then stooped to retrieve it. The handwriting was fine, deliberate. "He will never love you, my lady. But others might." There was no signature, but the hand struck her as familiar, an echo from another life, before marriage had turned affection into duty. She slipped the note into her glove without a flicker of reaction and moved among the guests once more. Yet the words burned quietly against her skin. Others might. The thought was dangerous, treacherous even, yet not entirely unwelcome. Somewhere deep within the locked chambers of her heart, something stirred, a whisper of what it had felt like to be desired without consequence. Across the room, the Marquis observed her, though none would have guessed it. His gaze followed her movements with the faintest tension, his jaw set too tightly for comfort. Perhaps it was pride, perhaps the faint unease of realizing that indifference, once claimed, could become a weapon against oneself. But when their eyes met, only for a heartbeat, he looked away first. The evening wore on. The final waltz dissolved into farewells, into the rustle of cloaks and the creak of carriages departing into mist. Eleanor walked beside her husband through the long, silent corridor to their waiting coach. The night smelled faintly of rain. Neither spoke. The wheels began to turn over cobblestones slick with fog. Inside the dim carriage, candlelight trembled between them. She could see his reflection faintly in the glass, severe, remote. "At last," he said quietly, "you comported yourself admirably this evening." It was praise, in his fashion. Yet it landed hollow. "I have had practice," she replied. His gaze flicked to her face, then away. "London expects composure," he said. "We must not disappoint it." "No," she whispered. "We must not." The silence that followed was deep and final. Outside, the city blurred into shadow, and inside, two souls sat inches apart, bound by name, divided by pride. Somewhere beneath her glove, the folded note pressed against her palm like a heartbeat, and for the first time, Eleanor wondered if indifference might be more fragile than it seemed. The carriage rolled on through the sleeping streets, carrying them both toward a dawn neither was prepared to face. The following spring arrived softer than expected, its mornings sweet with lilac and its afternoons veiled in mist. Wrentham Hall, with its endless corridors and echoing marble floors, lay surrounded by gardens that bloomed in obedient precision. Rows of roses and white tulips tended more carefully than the hearts within its walls. Lady Eleanor walked among them often now, her pale pink gown catching the sunlight like a promise never kept. The Marquis, ever distant, had returned from Parliament with more papers, more silence, and more indifference. Yet beneath that silence, something restless had begun to stir, too subtle for words, too late for comfort. It began with a letter. Not from London, not from family, but from a name she had not spoken in years. Captain Thomas Avery, once her childhood companion and the boy who had stolen her first dance beneath the apple trees of Ashcombe Manor. His handwriting trembled faintly on the page, though his words were steady. He wrote of his return from Waterloo, of England's changed heart, and, delicately, of how he had heard of her marriage. The letter ended simply, "I hope happiness finds you, even where affection cannot." Eleanor folded it carefully, her pulse uneven. There was no impropriety in those words, yet they breathed with the ghost of tenderness. Days later, a small parcel arrived, a silver locket, engraved with her initials and an intricate crest of lilies. It was a token of remembrance, nothing more, yet its weight in her palm felt perilous. She did not wear it, but she did not send it back either. The Marquis noticed nothing at first. His attention was occupied with estate matters and the unending machinery of his dignity. But servants' talk, and one whisper, repeated twice, was enough to travel the length of the house. By the end of the week, London's gossip mills were already grinding. When the rumor reached him, he said nothing for an entire day. That evening, after supper taken in tense quiet, he entered the drawing-room where Eleanor sat by the fire, embroidery resting untouched in her lap. His footsteps were deliberate, his expression perfectly composed. "I am told," he said, "that you have received correspondence of a personal nature." Her eyes lifted slowly. If you refer to Captain Avery's letter, it was polite. Nothing more. Politeness can be dangerous in the wrong mouths, he said. Especially when the world watches ours so closely. You mean your world, my lord. Her voice was soft, but it carried. The one where reputation is worth more than affection. He stopped near the firelight, and for the first time in months, his restraint faltered. You endanger my name, madam, with your sentimentality. Eleanor rose, her composure crystalline but trembling at the edges. And you endanger my heart, my lord, with your indifference. Their eyes met, his, cold and shadowed, hers, bright and aching. Between them stretched the gulf that had grown ever since their vows were spoken. After a long silence, he inclined his head slightly. "Return the token," he said, his tone once more even. "There must be no misunderstanding." She bowed faintly. "As you wish." Yet when he left, she did not obey. Instead, she opened the locket and stared at the miniature portrait of Captain Avery inside. Young, handsome, alive with warmth. She studied it as one might study a memory, then closed it, the clasp snapping like a heartbeat. Summer brought new air, but not new peace. Wrentham Hall hosted a garden fete in June, a glittering gathering of nobility, filled with music and murmured speculation. Eleanor moved gracefully among the guests, her pink gown softened by sunlight, her smile careful and deliberate. Yet when Captain Avery approached her across the garden path, dressed in the sober uniform of a soldier made humble by victory, something within her faltered. "My lady," he greeted with a bow, his voice gentle. "It has been too long." "Too long indeed," she answered, keeping her tone polite, though her hands trembled slightly. "You should not have written." "And yet I could not help it," he said, his eyes steady. "I feared the woman I once knew had been replaced by a shadow in satin." Before she could respond, she felt the air shift. Wrentham was watching. Across the terrace, his gaze fixed upon them like frost on glass. She withdrew immediately, excusing herself with a smile that did not reach her eyes. But the damage was done. The following day, the captain received orders of reassignment. Far north, indefinite. No one knew how or why, but Eleanor did. She found the paper upon her husband's desk, his handwriting across its margin, for discretion's sake. The ink was black and merciless. That night, she sat alone in her chambers, the locket clutched in her hand, the firelight trembling against her cheeks. Pride told her to despise him. Yet pity crept in, the kind one feels for someone who wounds out of fear. Outside her window, rain began to fall, soft and steady. The gardens below blurred into watercolor. She opened the locket again, but the face of the young officer seemed suddenly far away, as though it belonged to another lifetime. Her husband's cruelty had been born not of hatred, she thought, but of cowardice. And somehow, that realization hurt even more. Meanwhile, Wrentham sat alone in his study, staring into the hearth. The memory of her standing with Avery haunted him, the tilt of her head, the ease in her smile. It was not love he had seen there, but the possibility of it, and it had terrified him. To love was to yield, and yielding had never been in his nature. Yet he could not unsee it, nor could he forgive himself for what he felt. Days passed in a hush between them. They dined in silence, passed in corridors like strangers, their words reduced to necessity. But one evening, as Eleanor prepared to retire, she found something unexpected upon her dressing table. The locket she had locked away returned to her. She opened it slowly and gasped. The miniature of Captain Avery was gone. In its place was a tiny portrait of the Marquis himself, delicately painted, his expression softer than she had ever seen in life. For a long moment, she stared at it, unable to breathe. The gesture was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it was more confession than words could have managed. She closed the locket, pressing it to her lips before tucking it once more beneath silk and lace. Later that night, she crossed paths with him in the hallway. He paused, candlelight catching in his eyes. "Did you find what was returned to you?" he asked quietly. "I did. And you disapprove?" "I do not know what I feel," she said truthfully. "Then perhaps," he murmured, "we are finally equal in something." He passed by her, his scent of smoke and rain lingering after he was gone. She stood there long after, her fingers resting on the locket hidden near her heart. The first crack of something unspoken had formed between them. Not yet love, not even forgiveness, but the faint, trembling bridge of human longing. Outside, thunder rolled distantly across the moors. Inside, Wrentham Hall slept under its mask of peace, unaware that within its gilded silence, two hearts had begun to stir against their own pride. And though neither would say it aloud, both knew the storm was only beginning. Winter came early to Wrentham Hall that year, settling over the estate like a long exhale. The rose garden slept beneath frost, the fountains froze mid-cascade, and the trees stood skeletal against a pale sky. Inside, the air was warm with firelight and quiet discontent. Lady Eleanor moved through the corridors with her usual composure, yet something within her had changed. The locket she once hid now rested openly against her throat, a quiet defiance, a fragile emblem of something that might have been affection, or forgiveness, or both. The Marquis noticed, though he said nothing. He had learned to fear his own words. Their silence had become its own language, filled with glances that said too much and gestures that said nothing. But beneath that stillness, an ache lived in him like a buried ember. Each day he saw her walking alone in the winter garden, pale against the snow, her figure framed by bare branches, and each day it grew harder to remain unmoved. What had begun as pride had turned to punishment, one that neither of them deserved. The morning she announced her departure, the housekeeper found him in his study, unmoving. "Her ladyship requests that the carriage be prepared by noon," she said softly. He gave no reply. Only when the door closed did he rise, his hand tightening around the edge of the desk until his knuckles paled. She was leaving. She had written to her father, citing ill health, though both knew it was not her body that ailed her. At midday, the sky hung low and gray as she descended the staircase. Her trunks had already been sent ahead, her traveling cloak lined with fur. The servants stood in quiet rows, heads bowed, unsure whether they witnessed the departure of a guest or the end of a marriage. The Marquis appeared at the base of the stairs, his expression calm, yet his eyes betrayed the faintest flicker of unease. "You intend to leave without a word to me?" he asked. His tone was controlled, but the strain beneath it was unmistakable. Eleanor paused. "I did not wish to inconvenience you, my lord. You have long preferred my silence." "I prefer civility," he replied. "This sudden retreat invites speculation." "Let them speculate," she said. "They always have. It seems society is the only companion that truly delights you." He stepped closer, the space between them fragile as spun glass. "You cannot leave while my name still binds you." Her gaze lifted to meet his. "Your name has been my prison, my lord, not my home." The words struck him harder than he expected. For a moment, the mask slipped, the man beneath revealed, uncertain, haunted by something he could neither claim nor surrender. The air between them shimmered with unspoken things. "Eleanor," he said at last, her name foreign on his tongue. "You think me heartless. Perhaps I am. But do you believe I have not suffered in this?" "I believe you have hidden behind your suffering as others hide behind kindness," she answered. "You made a vow, not to me, but to your pride." He took a breath, slow and uneven. "You think I do not know what I've done?" His voice was low now, raw. "Every day, I watch you move through these halls like light itself, and I cannot touch you. I cannot speak without fearing I will break something sacred." Her hands tightened around the handle of her cloak. "Then why tell me now, when it changes nothing?" "Because I cannot bear the thought of you walking out of this house and never returning." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind hissed through the windows, rattling the panes like faint applause for their undoing. She turned toward the door, but he stepped forward suddenly, catching her wrist, not roughly, but with desperation barely restrained. "I said I would never love you," he whispered. "And perhaps I believed it once. But I said it because I already did, and I feared what that love would cost me." She froze, her breath catching. His voice, stripped of its hauteur, trembled with something human, something wounded. "I have envied every man who looked at you kindly," he continued. I have despised every smile that was not mine. I have called it dignity, but it was only cowardice. The silence that followed was absolute. Firelight flickered over his face, softening the harshness that had defined him. Eleanor's eyes glistened, though no tears fell. She withdrew her hand slowly, and for the first time, he let it go. "Do not say these things because I am leaving," she said quietly. "Say them because they are true. They are truer than any I have ever spoken." She looked at him, this man who had built walls from pride and named them virtue, and for a heartbeat she saw what might have been, had the years between them been different. Yet the wound of neglect does not close easily. "Then what would you have me do?" she asked softly. "Stay," he said. The word was simple, naked. "Stay, and let me learn what love requires." She studied him for a long moment, the sound of the wind filling the silence between them. Slowly, she unfastened the clasp of her cloak and let it fall to the floor. Then, without a word, she reached into the folds of her gown and drew forth the locket. Opening it, she held it out for him to see. Inside, his own portrait stared back, painted in miniature, his eyes gentler than she had ever seen them in life. "I replaced it long before I understood why," she said. "Perhaps I hoped the man within would one day resemble the one without." He took the locket in his trembling hand, his gaze flicking between it and her. For a moment, the world outside seemed to still. Then softly he said, "Perhaps he does." She looked down, her breath uneven. "Love does not erase what was done." "No," he murmured. "But it might give meaning to what remains." A long silence followed, neither peace nor tension, but the fragile calm that arrives when pride finally breaks. He reached for her hand once more, not to claim it, but to hold it. The fire crackled, the clock struck one, and the winter light fell across their joined shadows. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. "If I stay, it will not be as the woman you married, but as the one you once refused to see. Then I shall begin again," he said, "and see you properly this time." The words hung between them like a vow born too late and yet somehow perfectly timed. Outside, the snow began to fall, soft, deliberate, endless. Within that quiet descent, something thawed. She did not promise to love him, nor did he ask. It was enough that neither turned away. That night, as the candles burned low, Eleanor stood once more before the mirror in the ballroom where her humiliation had begun. The same chandelier gleamed above her, the same baby-pink gown glowed against the darkness. Yet her reflection no longer looked like a woman waiting to be loved. It looked like a woman who had chosen her own worth. The Marquis entered quietly, stopping a few steps behind her. Their eyes met in the glass, hers steady, his uncertain, both human at last. "They will gossip," he said quietly. "Let them," she replied. "For once, they may speak the truth." And so, beneath the lingering echo of the waltz that had once marked their distance, two hearts, bent but unbroken, found the courage to begin again, not with declarations, but with the quiet, enduring grace of forgiveness. Outside, winter kept its vigil, but inside Rentham Hall, the first promise of spring had already begun to bloom.